Octopath Traveler. Where do I even begin? The basics, I guess. Octopath Traveler is a turn-based JRPG by Square Enix. Most of the people I know who've played it have enjoyed it, and with 86% positive reviews on Steam, I think it's safe to say it's been well received. I went in expecting some good times, a fairly lengthy campaign, and good fodder for a decent video. But after 82 hours of gameplay, I can honestly say I could have never predicted just how much I simultaneously love and hate this game. As the title of the video suggests, Octopath Traveler is a good game, maybe even a great game. It does many things very right, but it has some significant flaws that I feel seriously hold it back from its true potential. The experience of Octopath Traveler is one of soaring highs and crushing lows, at least for me. While I'll go on record as saying that it has one of my favorite core combat systems in any JRPG, Octopath Traveler has also given me the most severe burnout for a video game that I've had in a very long time. Octopath Traveler deserves to be remembered as a good game, but it could have been a masterpiece. It deserves both glowing praise and scathing critique. So please, join me as I take a look at Octopath Traveler. But before I move on, if you end up enjoying the video, please consider liking and subscribing because it really does help me out. Also, Twitter, Discord, and my second channel exist, and if you want to support the channel more directly, consider Patreon for early access to future videos, or super thanks to leave a highlighted comment that I will read out in a future video. Alright, enough of that. I have very mixed feelings about this game, but I absolutely have to give unilateral praise for the art, music, and sound design. It looks and sounds absolutely amazing, and I have to give massive props to the creatives at Square Enix. You guys did a fantastic job. Visually, Octopath Traveler is pixel art inspired by the 16-bit era. You know, stuff you'd find on the SNES, which I'd argue was one of the most important periods in JRPG history. But it's not just a one-to-one reimagining of an SNES game 25 years later. There are a lot of visual additions and effects that simply weren't possible when games were limited to 16-bit. There are a lot of lighting effects, particles, and other little touches such as fully animated birds in the background. And in the world, there's much more of a feeling of openness and scale than I've seen in any SNES game. Rather than the typical top-down perspective, we're at more of an angle where we can actually see into the distance. And the game itself is absolutely littered with great character and enemy designs. In particular, I think every single boss in the game looks phenomenal. I won't go on too much about this because you'll be able to just look at the video to see what I'm talking about, but man, does this game look good. And the soundtrack is great as well. Unfortunately, due to copyright issues, I can't play it here, but the game is accompanied by a beautiful orchestral soundtrack. That's not exactly something I'd listen to on my own, but served as an excellent companion piece to the gameplay. At the end of the day, it's pleasant to hear and very much served to keep me immersed in the world, so I feel it more than served its purpose. I'd recommend checking out the soundtrack on YouTube if you're not planning on playing the game for yourself. It would be a shame for all the hard work that went into it to go unappreciated. And on top of all that, the sound design and voice acting are really solid as well. Attacks and spells all feel weighty, and it interacts really well with the game's core break gimmick, which I'll explain later on. And the voice actors all do a fantastic job, at least in the English version. Not everything is voiced, but the scenes that are, as well as the various fluff lines, highlight the personalities of each of the main cast, from Olberic's duty-bound stoicism to Tressa's bouncy excitability. A lot of times when I'm playing a video game, if something is going to be rushed and lazy, it's usually the voice acting. So it's really nice to see good voice acting in a game. It is expensive, and in most cases you can get away without it, so I do appreciate when the effort is made. With that out of the way, let's move on to gameplay. In the intro to the video, I said that Octopath Traveler has one of my favorite core combat systems in any JRPG, and that wasn't a lie. Despite my overall mixed feelings on the game, I have to give it credit for a rock-solid foundation. So let's talk about it. Octopath Traveler works on a modernized turn-based system that we've been seeing more and more of as of late. So let me give you a Cliff Notes summary of the history of JRPG battle systems just for context. Back in the early days of JRPGs, think NES era, you'd queue up all the moves your party members would make, and then every unit in the combat would do their move in an order determined by their speed stat and or RNG. A few years later, JRPGs such as Chrono Trigger and many of the classic Final Fantasy titles started using the Active Time Battle, or ATB system. The way ATB systems work is that each character will have their own personal progress bar which fills up according to their speed stat, and once it fills completely, that character can then take an action, giving the combat encounter more of a sense of flow. It also helps to balance out weaker, speedy characters who tended to be relatively underpowered before then. But in the modern day, it's becoming more common to see a system where characters are given an explicit turn order where everyone still makes their moves in accordance with their speed, but you get to direct them at the beginning of their action, making it much easier to react to what the enemy is doing and to switch things up on the fly. Two great games that do this are Battle Chasers Night War and Epilogue. Highly recommend both of them. Octopath Traveler has this as a baseline, but also reintroduces battle-wide rounds. So you still get the planning element, but high speed will no longer result in increased DPS on its own. In addition, you can see not only the move order for the current round, but the next turn as well. This puts much more emphasis on the planning side of things. And to be clear, speedy characters are absolutely still valuable. Octopath Traveler leans very heavily into secondary effects and synergy between party members. A fast character being able to set up some sort of effect, be it a buff for the party or a status ailment for the enemy, can be the difference between life and death. And furthermore, speed can really start to matter when you consider the massive implications of the break system. Okay, so I'm assuming that most of you watching have played JRPGs before. Ever since Final Fantasy I all the way back in 1987, JRPGs have pretty much all incorporated enemies that are weak to certain attacks. Water-based enemies are typically weak to lightning, undead enemies are weak to light or holy damage, that kind of thing. In the majority of cases, that weakness pretty much just translates to a damage multiplier. But while Octopath Traveler does do that, it also has a very unique take on weaknesses. See, there are actually 12 attack types in the game, 6 classes of weapons for physical damage, and 6 elemental sources of magic, with different character jobs being able to wield different types of weapons and having different magical elements available to them via their abilities. For example, the warrior job can wield swords and polearms but cannot cast any magic. The hunter can wield axes and bows and also has access to single target lightning damage. The scholar is restricted to staves but can cast fire, ice, and lightning spells. And different abilities will deal different types of damage, be it physical or magical. And it's worth noting that each character can wield one of every weapon type they have access to and can swap between them in combat with no penalty. And as you might expect, on their turn, each character can either do a standard attack with any of their equipped weapons at no cost, perform a skill which costs SP, which is this game's version of mana, defend to reduce incoming damage, or use an item from the inventory. So the way this affects enemies is that they each have a certain number of weaknesses. It can be as little as 1, but that's pretty rare. Usually it'll be somewhere from 3 to 5. They'll be hidden when you first encounter them, but can be revealed by hitting the enemy with something they're weak to or through one of the scholar skills. Now, one thing you may have noticed by now is that every enemy has a blue shield with a number next to their weaknesses. This is their break meter. Every time an enemy is hit by a damage type they're weak to, that number will tick down, and when it hits 0, you get a break on them, which does 2 things. Firstly, it'll immediately interrupt and stun them. They will lose any remaining actions for the current round of combat and skip the next round entirely. Secondly, the enemy will enter the vulnerable state, where they'll be temporarily weak to all attack types and will take an extra 50% damage on top of that. When they recover, they will go first in that turn to prevent stun locking. So the ebb and flow of combat typically revolves around breaking enemies as much as possible, both to prevent them from messing with you, but also to open them up to massive damage. Throughout the game, you're going to need to balance your need for each effect, especially during many of the boss fights where you both want to prevent debilitating attacks and chip away at a massive health pool. And this allows for an extra layer of decision making when it comes to what skills you use. For example, the hunter has a skill called Rain of Arrows, which will send out 5 to 8 weak and relatively inaccurate bow attacks to random enemies on the field. Well, if there's only a boss on the field and it's weak to bows, you're probably getting 3 to 5 ticks towards breaking them. Even though you're not dealing much damage, that is exceptionally valuable. And this system is augmented by the boost system. See, every turn, each character will gain 1 BP up to a maximum of 5 at any one time. There are skills that can give you extra, but for the most part, it's 1 per turn. With each action you take, you have the option of using 1 to 3 of that character's BP to boost your next action. If it's a weapon attack, you'll do 1 more attack per BP consumed. If it's a status effect, either positive or negative, boosting it will make it last longer. And if it's just a singular effect, such as dealing damage or healing damage, boosting will increase the power of that effect. Also, when you boost, you will not gain BP at the start of the following turn. So the result of these core systems is that there's a lot more planning involved in combat than you'd see in most other turn-based JRPGs. In a lot of older JRPGs, the extent of your planning would be to find a team composition that works, equip them properly, and be prepared to deal with a couple of unique mechanics with each boss. With Octopath Traveler, you still have to do all that, but there are so many extra layers of how should I go about this. See, one thing I found myself doing throughout my playthrough was intentionally delaying breaks. If one of my party members was the last to move in a round, I would typically not have them break anyone, especially not a boss. Because if I waited till the next round and had someone there do the job, I would cause the enemy to skip 2 turns rather than just 1. And there were times when I'd have to choose between healing my party and using my healer to get a break off and prevent an attack. And that's not to mention the balancing act that goes into managing boosts. See, the system is designed to incentivize using the maximum boost of 3, but not to hold on to it for too long. You don't want to use boosts willy-nilly because each time you do, you sacrifice 1 turn of BP regeneration. But you also only have a maximum of 5 BP per character. But what do you want to use your boost on? That's a huge consideration for any fight that's even remotely challenging, and there are a lot of those. See, one option is to use it on regular attacks. Now, this might seem like a waste when you consider how strong some of the skills are, but it actually serves a really unique purpose. Since each boost adds one extra attack, that means that boosting can allow a character to significantly lower the time it takes to break an enemy. Another option is to use the boost to maximize damage potential. If you can use a boosted powerful skill when an enemy is vulnerable, you can deal a shitload of damage to them. This is arguably necessary in certain boss fights due to the absolutely massive health pools some of them have. You can also use it on a status effect skill. See, I've kinda neglected to talk about it, but status effects, both positive and negative, are absolutely massive in this game. Lowering a boss's attack or raising your party's defense can and will save your ass. Reducing an enemy's physical resistance will massively up your damage potential. Hell, something as simple as having a boost ready to empower a heal can be game-changing. And of course, I haven't even talked about how you can potentially combo different skills together between your party for a greater effect. For example, the Dancer has a skill that temporarily boosts an ally's elemental damage. The Merchant has a skill that will give an ally extra BP. If you use both of these on the Scholar, you can immediately get him to a place where he can cast a high damage boosted spell with an additional damage modifier. And of course, the amount you have the Dancer and Merchant boost will affect things as well. Now, I want to make something clear to you. If this was the totality of how Octopath Traveler's combat worked, it would be a complex and intricate system that requires a lot of planning and would be a satisfying experience on its own. But there are multiple key mechanics that I have not even mentioned yet. It's actually been kinda hard trying to figure out how exactly to structure this video, because despite being very approachable, the gameplay of Octopath Traveler is surprisingly complex and interconnected. As I was scripting the earlier parts of this video, I had to constantly stop myself from going off on tangents explaining how random other crap would affect the things I was talking about. Everything seemingly affects everything else, and the game overall has this layered complexity that I consistently found myself impressed by. I mentioned several times already that I ultimately have mixed feelings about Octopath Traveler, and while there are sections of this video where I absolutely will not pull punches, very few of my criticisms are of the core combat system. This game has an extremely solid foundation, and that is so important in any turn-based JRPG. For all its faults, and I'll definitely be getting into those, Octopath Traveler is a game that's remarkably easy to get into. Seriously, the systems are very intuitive at their core, but as the game progresses, systems are unlocked and different combinations of things are experimented with, it becomes a very strategic game with a surprisingly high skill cap. That is a balance that is very hard to strike, and I can appreciate the care and effort that went into designing this game. It merits praise. So let's talk about the job system. Like basically every turn-based JRPG in history, you can build your party out of various different character classes known as jobs. In Octopath Traveler, there are 8 characters, each with their own innate job, and you can build a party out of any 4 of them. You can kinda switch things around, and there are secondary jobs, but I'll get into the details of that a bit later. The important thing to know for now is that each character has a job that is tied to them. They will always have that job, and they will always have an aspect of that job that is unique to them, known as a unique talent. So even if another character takes on that job, only the original job holder can do that specific thing. I promise this will make sense later. Remember how I said there are times where it's hard to structure this video due to how interconnected things are? This is one of those times. The base jobs are as follows. Honnet the Hunter is a physical attacker using axes and bows. Her identity primarily revolves around doing a shitload of physical damage with a skill set focusing heavily on bows, though hunters do gain access to a single lightning spell. In addition to generally good damage potential, hunters have access to bow skills that attack targets multiple times, allowing you to quickly break enemies weak to bows, and they also have access to the leg hold trap skill, which I'd argue is the single best debuff in the game. Honnet's unique talent is Beast Lore, which allows you to capture any beast you encounter in the wild, which can then be used a limited number of times for different effects depending on the beast in question. It can be an attack, a buff, a heal, things like that. It also allows her to infinitely send out her animal companion Linda, who acts as a relatively low-level attacking beast. Ophelia the Cleric is, if you'll pardon the Final Fantasy comparison, the white mage of the cast, whose moveset is all about party-wide heals and revives, and defensively, she's a staff wielder who can cast light magic. This is the quintessential healing juggernaut that you'll find in pretty much any turn-based JRPG. The one nice little touch is that clerics are the best light magic used in the game, so they're actually not bad offensively against enemies weak to light, and this is pretty relevant throughout a lot of the game. Ophelia's unique talent is Summon. In the Overworld, she can use her Guide skill on most NPCs. I'll talk about Overworld skills a bit later. But the relevant part is that if you successfully guide an NPC, they will follow you and can be summoned in battle, where they'll basically join the party, attacking the enemies for a certain number of turns or until defeated, whichever comes first. This can be incredibly useful if you plan for specific fights by recruiting NPCs with attacks that correlate to an upcoming boss's specific weakness. But without that foresight, it's kinda shit. Usually. Alfyn the Apothecary is an axe-wielding support character. Apothecaries specialize in single-target healing and revives and curing status ailments. While they lack the multi-target capabilities of the cleric, an apothecary's heals and revives are much stronger and cost significantly less SP. I found that the cleric was able to do all the heavy healing for most of the game, but when I got into endgame territory, the additional power of an apothecary's heals started to become very welcome. Also, the apothecary is the only job that can innately cure status ailments without consumables, while also providing temporary immunity to said ailments. As I mentioned earlier, status effects are a big deal in this game. Apothecaries also have reasonable offensive capabilities with axe damage, an ice spell, and the ability to poison enemies, which deals percentage-based damage each time that unit makes a move, which really does scale well into the late game. Alfyn's unique talent is Concoct, which allows him to create various concoctions in battle with ingredients he'll readily find in the world. These do things such as restoring BP, healing, dealing magical damage to enemies, curing status ailments, buffing allies, and debuffing enemies. If you know what makes what, this is an incredibly powerful ability that makes Alfyn an extremely versatile character. If you don't, it's borderline useless. You can find charts of every concoction online, so I do recommend having that available if you plan on using Alfyn. Primrose the Dancer is a dagger-wielding support character. Dancers specialize in buffing their allies' physical and magical attack, physical defense, and speed. They also have access to solid dark magic attacks and have a unique skill called Bewildering Grace. This is a fun skill that causes a random positive or negative thing to happen. Of course, this is pretty crap in boss fights, but it's super fun to use when exploring the world, mainly because if you use a max boost on this skill, it has a tiny chance of multiplying your experience for that fight by 100. So yeah, I found myself using it obsessively. Though in fights that actually matter, dancers mostly take on a support role. Primrose's unique talent is actually Summon, and is functionally identical to Ophelia's, though the overworld skill is called Charm rather than Guide. Tressa the Merchant is kind of a hybrid character. Merchants have reasonable physical attacks, support skills, and are the primary user of wind magic, though they don't excel at any one thing. Merchants can wield polearms and bows, are the only base job who can exploit wind weaknesses, and have some interesting support capabilities such as being able to give allies extra BP. Merchants can also self-buff with dodge, which will cause them to take no damage from the next physical attack they would have received. They can also use the rest skill to heal their own health and restore their own SP. Now, from this description, you might think this job is just a bit underpowered, and I don't blame you for that. In fact, that's what I thought at first. However, while it is somewhat lacking on its own, it does actually synergize with certain other things really well, and I'll talk about that a bit later. Tressa's unique talent is Eye for Money. This does not actually have any effect in battle, but when in the overworld, every time you go to a new screen, you'll gain a random amount of money, which does add up over time. Therion the Thief is a hybrid as well, but more of a targeted hybrid with a focus on offensive support and SP management. Thieves wield daggers and swords and have limited access to fire magic. They can also apply debuffs to physical attack and defense, can unleash dagger attacks that steal health and SP, and can donate a portion of their SP to an ally. Thieves can be game-changing in boss fights when you're up against a single powerful physical attacker. Cutting that enemy's attack and defense can make a real difference, and the HP and SP stealing skills allow them to be incredibly self-sufficient. Therion's unique talent is Picklock. This has no in-battle usage, but in the overworld you'll sometimes come across locked chests, which typically contain better loot than their unlocked counterparts. You can only open them if Therion is in your party to pick the lock. I don't like this. It essentially forces you to have Therion in your party whenever you're exploring, or to make a second sweep of every area with him. But everything else about him is fine. Cyrus the Scholar is, if you'll once again pardon the Final Fantasy comparison, the black mage of the party. While the Scholar's physical capabilities are limited to staff attacks, they are the best offensive magic users of the base jobs with access to AoE magic for dealing fire, ice, and lightning damage. Scholars also have access to the Analyze skill, which allows you to reveal enemy weaknesses with no guesswork required. I found the Scholar to be one of the most consistently useful of the base jobs, and in my opinion, you should probably have a Scholar in your party more often than not. Cyrus's unique talent is Study Foe. At the start of each battle, he will automatically reveal one weakness from each enemy for free, making him incredibly useful when you run into random encounters, as after a while you'll end up passively revealing all the weaknesses without having to actually put any effort into it. Lastly, we have Olberic the Warrior as the primary physical damage dealer and tank. Warriors can wield swords and polearms, and their skill set revolves almost entirely around dealing physical damage and buffing their own physical attack and defense. They also have access to the Incite skill, which is the only taunt ability in the game, forcing enemies to target them instead of their allies. It's also worth noting that the Warrior is the only class that cannot on its own deal magic damage. Warriors are one of those classes you see in just about any JRPG, and they're always pretty decent. They never end up being useless, though their simplicity can kinda pigeonhole them into one single plan of action for the entire game. You do kinda get that when you first start the game, but it does actually improve once additional systems are unlocked that increase the complexity of the game as a whole. Olberic's unique talent is Bolster Defense. Like many JRPGs, Octopath Traveler allows you to defend instead of taking an action. This effectively skips your turn, reduces incoming damage for the turn, and increases your move priority on the next turn. Olberic's ability improves the damage reduction of this command. This is one of those talents that's very situational. In the right circumstances, it can be the difference between life and death, but it could also end up being useless if you don't ever want to use Defend. Though it does need to be noted that warriors can gain the ability to automatically take hits for allies who are near death, so Bolster Defense can actually be quite useful there. So those are the 8 main jobs. As I mentioned earlier, you assemble a party of 4, which you can switch up whenever you're in town. And on a baseline level, I think this is a good composition of jobs for a JRPG. Each job has its role, its strengths, and its weaknesses. Furthermore, I feel like these jobs were tailor-made to not make any job truly mandatory. Like, take a retro JRPG, say Final Fantasy I. If you try to set up your party without a white mage, you're gonna run into some serious difficulties. And most other JRPGs afterward had a similar problem where there would be one job, class, or character who would be the dedicated healer of the party, and you'd be more or less locked into using it specifically as a heal bot if you didn't want to be absolutely miserable. Now, I use the healer as my example here because I think it's the most immediately obvious one, but I feel like the other standard JRPG roles often suffer from the same issue, albeit to a lesser extent where you can get away with breaking the mold at the cost of reduced efficacy. In most of the JRPGs I've played where you can customize your party composition, it's generally best to go with a physical damage dealer, a tank who may also be the physical damage dealer, a healer, and a defensive mage. While Octopath Traveler doesn't completely break away from that, it does provide you with many different options to complete the same objective. And to be clear, there's a system that I haven't even touched on yet that makes what I'm saying orders of magnitude more true. But even if you discount that, every JRPG role can be filled by at least 2 of the 8 baseline jobs in Octopath Traveler. The role of healer can be done by both the Cleric and the Apothecary. Physical damage can be handled by the Warrior and the Hunter. Support can be done by the Thief and the Dancer. And each job has its own specialties even within these JRPG roles, which historically have been pretty rigid. I really like that. I like when games give me different viable ways to tackle obstacles. And on top of that, due to the way story progression works in Octopath Traveler, more on that later, you're going to have to shuffle your party up here and there. There are segments where you'll be forced to include certain characters in your party, and unless you go about the game in a manner wildly outside what the developers intended, you'll find yourself having to switch your required party members up pretty regularly. So right up until you're ready to tackle the post-game, you're going to have to consistently tweak your party composition to come up with new strategies to overcome the obstacles in front of you. And I personally find that very satisfying, and it's one of the reasons I was able to sink dozens of hours into the game with relative ease. Octopath Traveler did give me some serious gamer burnout eventually, but that only actually happened towards the end of my time with the game, and for very specific reasons that had nothing to do with the core gameplay systems. For most of my time, I found myself quite engaged. So before I get to the big game-changing system that I've hinted at a few times already, I have to talk a bit about character and job progression. As you might expect, after combat you'll get a few different types of rewards. You'll get money, which can be used to purchase a variety of things. You'll get experience points, which allows you to level up your character. This is one of those games where individual levels don't matter so much, rather it's the accumulation of levels that makes the difference. So you'll barely notice the difference between level 16 and 17, but the gradual growth from say level 10 to level 30 will be impactful. Also, when it comes to individual character strength, gear ends up mattering a whole lot more than levels. It's also worth noting that characters who are not in your active party will still receive experience, albeit at a reduced rate. So you never have a situation where your characters are straight up unusable, though severely neglecting them will cause them to be underleveled for sure. I know this because I did this. The last reward you get is JP, which is used to unlock skills for each job. Basically, you start out with very limited options with each job, but you can unlock each new skill in any order with an escalating JP cost each time. And it's worth noting that only active participants in each battle gain JP, so while your benched characters will continue to level up, you have to actually include them if you want to upgrade their jobs. So that brings us to job progression. As I already mentioned, you can spend an individual character's JP to improve their job, but there's a bit more that goes into it than simply unlocking one active skill at a time. For starters, the final skill unlock for each job is a special powerful skill known as a divine skill. Not only is it deliberately more powerful than other skills, but it's designed in such a way that you can't even use it without a max boost. Also, while some divine skills are simply a damage dealer, others will have more of a supporting effect, but those types of divine skills do not affect other divine skills. So for example, the Cleric's divine skill is Aelfric's Auspices, which will make it so for 3 turns an ally of your choice will perform their skills twice instead of once. But that won't apply if they also use a divine skill. Additionally, there's another mechanic that's tied to upgrading your jobs. See, once you unlock your 4th skill for a certain character's job, you unlock their first support skill for that job, and you'll gain 1 for each of the remaining 3 skill unlocks. These work a bit differently than regular skills. Instead of being something you select in battle, it's something that you can equip onto the character directly for a bonus of some sort. So for example, let's look at the Dancer's support skills. There's The Show Goes On, which makes it so buffs cast by that character last an extra turn. Eye for an Eye makes it so whenever a character is attacked, they have a 50% chance of using a weapon attack in return. Second Wind provides passive SP restoration each turn, and Encore provides a free revive once per battle. As you unlock these support skills, you can equip and unequip them at will. Each character has 4 slots for support skills. Now you might be wondering why it is I mentioned this. 4 slots makes sense given that each job has 4 associated support skills. But it's actually more complicated than that. When I started playing, I'd assumed that the reason you could equip and unequip skills was basically a means of toggling them on and off. However, that all changed when I came across the first of many god shrines. Inside was an altar to one of Octopath Traveler's in-universe gods, and when I interacted with it, an entirely new system got unlocked. Secondary jobs. When you find a shrine, you'll unlock one of the main jobs as a secondary job, where they can then be assigned to each of your characters and swapped around at will, though each secondary job can only be held by one character at a time. When a character is given a secondary job, they immediately take on all characteristics of that job on top of those of their primary job, except for unique talents and overworld skills, which includes which weapon types they can equip and the ability to unlock active, passive, and divine skills from this new class. Unlocking these skills is exactly the same as upgrading the primary job. Spend JP to unlock new skills, and as you progress, you'll unlock that job's passive skills. Though the neat thing is that while you do have to have the secondary job active to use its active skills, once you unlock the passive skills, they remain unlocked and you can use them even if you give the character a completely different secondary job. So theoretically, every character could have access to every single passive skill in the game. This is incredible, and it makes the game infinitely more complex as now you can mix and match the primary and secondary jobs to customize your party to your tastes. And when it comes to passive skills, there's definitely an element of strategy there. You still only have 4 slots, so even if you only level a character's primary job and a single secondary, you're still going to have to make some choices. But the neat thing is that certain passive skills seem like they're tailor-made to work well with completely different jobs than the one that unlocks them. For example, the Dancer has Second Wind, which provides 5% maximum SP regeneration each turn. This just so happens to pair really well with the Scholar, which is a very SP-hungry job, and also with the Thief, who can give their stockpiled SP to another party member, and if boosted, that can be more than 100%. Now, this leaves them with nothing, which is not ideal, but with SP recovery, they can have enough SP on their next turn to use the Steal SP skill, which can very easily bring them back up to a usable amount. And this is far from the only example. The Scholar has Vim and Vigor, which restores HP each turn, which works really well on the Warrior, who's the dedicated tank job. The Merchant has SP Saver, which halves SP consumption. That's good on literally every job. The Apothecary has Inspiration, which restores SP with each standard attack. This combos really well with the Dancer's Eye for an Eye, which gives you a 50% chance to retaliate when attacked. With this system of a locked primary job and variable secondary job, there are so many different combinations of individual party members and party compositions you can make with them. And like I mentioned earlier, this game's story progression works in such a way that unless you're playing in a fairly weird way, you're going to be swapping out members after pretty much every story dungeon. So you'll be constantly switching things up and figuring out new ways to attack the game. And the neat thing about it is while certain combinations and compositions are more optimal than others, you're not locked into a strict meta. If it makes sense on paper, it's probably viable for most of the game. I purposefully didn't look up any optimal configurations until pretty late into my playthrough because the way I was doing things just worked for me, and I was having fun even though I probably could have been more efficient. The one criticism I'll give for this system is that in the long run, it does kind of discourage too much experimentation. Since the effectiveness of secondary jobs is gated behind JP, and it takes a ton of JP to fully upgrade each job, if you switch things up too much, you'll end up in a situation where your characters might not be able to reach their full potential since their JP will be spread across multiple jobs, rather than fully upgrading a single secondary job. So it becomes better to simply live with a less than efficient configuration rather than continually tweaking and optimizing. Not so much an issue for someone like me who's happy finding a groove and going with it, but I do feel for the people who enjoy the process of experimentation and optimization. Of course, you could always just grind for the extra JP, but I think one of Octopath Traveler's strengths is that for 99% of the game, there is zero grind needed. Seriously, I didn't have a single grind session until the very end of the game, and that was only because I'd neglected one of my characters and let him get super underleveled. If I'd been a bit more balanced in my party selection, I probably wouldn't have needed to do any grinding whatsoever. So I think it's a shame that the solution to the JP problem is grind, when one of the things I like about the game so much is that you don't have to grind. But ultimately, it's a fairly minor criticism. As I said earlier, if it makes sense on paper, it'll likely carry you until literally the endgame superboss. At that point, you may have to switch things up, but you'll have a nice extra chunk of JP on each character anyway, so the resulting grind will be minimal. So on top of all that, there's another little tidbit when it comes to secondary jobs. See, there are actually 4 additional shrines aside from the 8 main ones. But instead of just a room with an altar, these are late game dungeons. And at the end, you'll face off against that shrine's patron god. And after beating them, you'll gain a pretty badass reward. A new secondary job. One that's really fucking good. In fact, I'd argue that the 4 jobs you can unlock through these means are the 4 most powerful jobs in the game, and oh boy do they have an impact. They do have a higher JP cost to upgrade, but it's absolutely worth it. Let's quickly go over them. The Sorcerer is basically the Scholar on crack. Where the Scholar can deal fire, ice, and lightning AoE damage 1 or 2 times, the Sorcerer can use all 6 forms of magic and they hit 3 times. Sorcerer can also lower a target's elemental defense and has a suite of support skills focused around increasing elemental damage potential. It's worth noting that this is an extremely SP hungry job. The Rune Lord is my favorite job in the game and is centered around a really unique gimmick. The Rune Lord has access to the various rune skills, which gives the user a buff which will cause their attacks to also deal a burst of elemental damage depending on the type of rune skill used. They can also use the Transfer Rune skill, which will make it so all self buffs will, for a time, affect all party members, meaning that the elemental rune buffs will apply to the entire party and holy damn is that strong. Not only is that a lot of potential damage, but if you use it properly, enemies will break extremely quickly. And this job borders on OP when you give it to Tressa the Merchant for one simple reason. She gets the sidestep ability, which causes her to avoid 1 physical attack or more if she's boosting. But if she's using Transfer Rune, yeah, suddenly the entire party is immune to physical damage. The Starseer is basically the ultimate support job. Like the Dancer, this job is focused on providing boosts to allies, but these ones are a bit more niche, such as additional passive BP regeneration, passive HP regeneration, and temporary immunity to stat penalties. Also, the Starseer notably gains access to one of the best support skills in the game, Divine Aura, which gives a 1 in 4 chance of avoiding damage entirely. If it didn't cost 10,000 JP to unlock, I might have legitimately gone out of my way to get this skill on every single party member. And lastly, we have the War Master, which is the ultimate physical offense job. This is the only job which can, on its own, wield every single weapon class. Its skill set allows it to deal AoE damage with each of the various weapons. It has probably the strongest offensive divine skill, which has it smack every enemy with every weapon. And it also has access to the Nightmare Chimera skill, which is one of the most busted skills in the game if you use it properly. This skill will unleash a very powerful weapon attack at the cost of destroying that weapon. This is one of those skills that, if used properly, can not only easily hit the soft damage cap of 9,999, but can easily hit the hard cap, which does require a specific support skill of 99,999 with weapons that you can repurchase. So yeah, kinda busted. The War Master also has access to the Fortitude support skill, which allows the user to deal increased damage to lower their health, which can be used to set up some absolutely bonkers damage. So that's the core combat system of Octopath Traveler. I said it towards the beginning of the video, and I'll continue saying it. This game has a rock-solid foundation, and the level of complexity and intricacy that exists in such an easy-to-understand system is genuinely impressive. Though I do have my criticisms of the game, the fact that the core systems were so well done made it so I was able to enjoy myself for the vast majority of my 82 in-game hours. When the thing you're doing most is fun, that's generally a good sign. So now I want to quickly go over the overworld abilities known as path actions. I mentioned them briefly but didn't go into details. See, each of the 8 characters has something they can do in the overworld. Well, more accurately, there are 4 types of interactions you can have with most of the NPCs. They don't have in-game titles, but they revolve around collecting information, collecting items, combat, and recruitment. Each of these 4 categories can be done by 2 party members, one of which does it the noble way, while the other does it the rogue way. In general, the noble options will be more restrictive, but can be done with 0 risk or penalty, whereas the rogue options will often have some RNG associated with it, and should you fail that action, your reputation in town will suffer. If your reputation gets low enough, you'll be unable to use any more path actions in town, and will have to pay money to restore your reputation back to normal. When it comes to information gathering, you can use Alfyn's Inquire for the noble path, or Cyrus's Scrutinize for the rogue path. Successfully collecting information from an NPC can do a variety of things, such as give some fluff text, reveal a hidden item, increase the stock at one of the local shops, reduce the cost of resting at an inn, or boosting one of the other path actions in that area. Inquire has no chance of failure, but there is a level requirement to use it that varies per NPC. Scrutinize gives you a percentage chance of success, with failure harming reputation. This system is perfectly fine, though I found it got a bit tedious since I had this obsessive need to gain all the information from every fucking NPC in the game. So every time I made it to a new city, instead of being excited to explore and get the quests going, I instead went around just scrutinizing everyone, and it turned into a bit of a chore. By the time I had uncovered the whole map, it just felt like filler gameplay. For item acquisition, you can use Tressa's Purchase for the Noble Path or Therion's Steal for the Rogue Path. This quite simply allows you to obtain items from an NPC's inventory. The trade-off should be obvious. Purchase requires you to pay money for the item, though Tressa can score a discount if you get lucky. Steal gets you the item for free but has a chance of failure, harming reputation. As you might imagine, the more valuable the item, the harder it is to steal. Furthermore, some items simply cannot be purchased while others simply cannot be stolen. This ended up having the same effect on my experience as information gathering, as one of the things I ended up doing was just going on this massive spree of petty theft with each new city. Like, despite the party stopping many evil people from doing evil things, they are a fucking menace to society at this point. So while I find thievery in video games to be fun pretty much always, it did get slightly tedious. Though I can't complain that it got me a shitload of free consumables and ingredients. And of course, I would sometimes find some nice goodies that I couldn't steal, but that's basically just a less convenient shop. Combat is a strange one. You can use Olberic's Challenge for the Noble Path or Honnet's Provoke for the Rogue Path. What this does is allows you to fight an NPC one-on-one. If you win, you'll gain some money and experience, and the NPC will be knocked out. Usually this doesn't do much, but some NPCs are guarding things, and if you beat them in combat, you'll be able to get around them. The trade-off is that Challenge has a level requirement, but while Provoke does not, Honnet can only engage in the fight using her captured beasts and/or her pet Linda. Furthermore, you'll lose reputation if you lose a Provoke fight. This is one of those mechanics where I can take it or leave it. One-on-one fights just aren't very interesting when it comes to JRPGs in general. It's neat conceptually, but I'd like to see a bit more. Also, I almost never ended up using Provoke because it's just objectively shit in comparison. Being locked into summoning beasts really puts a damper on its usefulness, especially since all beasts except for the weak Linda are finite. Once you're done with them, you've got to go out and collect more, and provoking powerful NPCs can drain your beast collection real fast. And for recruitment, you can use Ophelia's Guide for the Noble Path or Primrose's Allure for the Rogue Path. If you remember from earlier, these are the Overworld companions to their unique summon talents. Essentially, they can recruit most NPCs to join the party and can send them out in combat where they will act autonomously for a few turns or until they take a bunch of damage. The trade-off is simple. Guide has a level requirement, whereas Allure has a chance of failure resulting in reputation loss. Not really much more to say here. Overall, as a gameplay mechanic, I found that this system of path actions is perfectly functional, but does get a bit tedious since I feel compelled to exhaust systems like gathering info or stealing items when I play games. However, I feel like this system really plays well into the way side quests work. Now, I'll get into side quests a bit more later on, but what you need to know for now is that when you find them out in the wild, you'll have to perform some sort of task which can vary from finding an item, completing a dungeon, discovering a piece of information, or finding a certain NPC. The quest could take you a few steps away or go to the other side of the map, and it's not always clear where exactly you need to go. But many of these side quests are done via path actions, and I think it's a really neat way to integrate this system into the wider game. A chef needs ingredients to cook an important meal? Buy or steal them from the people around town. An imprisoned criminal, regretting his actions, wants to know the fate of the wife he left behind? Scrutinize or inquire her, once you find her that is, to learn that she's been able to pick herself back up and lead a happy life, which brings the prisoner a little bit of comfort at the very end. An NPC is searching for their lost grandfather? Find him and guide or allure him into your party to reunite them. It's all really neat, and it makes you feel accomplished when you successfully figure out where to go and what to do. When you're exploring a new area and come across someone or something referenced in a side quest you've already started, sometimes there's that light bulb moment and you really feel like you figured it out, and that's a sensation that not many games are able to make me feel. So that's essentially how you interact with the game itself. But how does the story progression itself work? Because no, it's not like every other JRPG where you're given tasks one after the other to trigger story flags. How it does work is in the name. Octopath. 8 paths, 8 stories. Octopath Traveler has an ensemble cast of 8 protagonists, but rather than the 8 of them coming together to go on a single adventure, each one has their own journey to make and their own struggles to overcome. And while I'll get into writing later in the video, the story is structured in such a way that each story feels like a solo adventure, with it seeming like the rest of the party members' presence is actually non-canon. They don't appear in any of the cutscenes, they aren't referenced at all, nothing. Basically only there for gameplay purposes. So with 8 different stories, how exactly does that work? Well, each character has 4 chapters to their story, with the first chapter being used to introduce them. See, you start the game picking one of the 8 characters, and you'll basically have to solo their first chapter before moving on. And as you travel the world to start chapter 1 of the rest of the cast, they'll each join your party. The entirety of chapter 1 scales its difficulty progressively, so you'll never actually be overwhelmed this early into the game. And while you could theoretically do the entire story for a single character before moving on, the scaling strongly encourages going for all of chapter 1, then all of 2, then 3, then 4. You'll be at pretty much the perfect levels for everything if you do that, but you're gonna have to grind if you want to go out of order. And the neat thing about this is that when you're doing a certain character's story, you have to have them in your party, which forces you to constantly be switching up your composition throughout your entire experience. and I've already talked about how that's one of the game's strong suits. And furthermore, because you know that you'll definitely be needing every character, you're discouraged from neglecting any of them, though it can still happen. What I really like is that the game gives you options without feeling aimless. With 8 stories, you'll almost always have a choice as far as what you want to do, though you'll always have some sort of direction. And with 8 stories of 4 chapters each, that's 32 stages of critical path content alone. There are also side quests, optional dungeons, hidden goodies, and a super boss. There is a lot of game here. As I said, I have over 80 hours in game, and that wasn't me just screwing around. I always had some sort of purpose to what I was doing. The story chapters themselves are very formulaic from a gameplay perspective. Each chapter for each character is loosely divided into 3 parts. It starts out with a story/town section. You'll have a cutscene or 2 followed by a series of tasks you'll have to complete in the local area, usually involving that character's path action to some capacity. So for example, Cyrus the Scholar may have to scrutinize local townsfolk as he's investigating something. You'll learn a bit more about the characters, their story, and the world. The gameplay mostly serves as an interactive means of delivering that story to you, and there's little to no combat in these segments. But once that's done, you'll be directed towards a dungeon, which starts off the next segment, which is a JRPG dungeon. Explore a maze-esque area with random combat encounters, scattered loot, the whole 9 yards. And at the end of the dungeon, past an always convenient save point, is a boss. Kill the boss and there will be some sort of conclusion to that chapter. The conflict of that chapter functions sort of like its own mini-arc, which then allows for a transition into the next chapter, or in the case of chapter 4, closes off that character's main storyline. Every one of the 32 main chapters has this structure: town, dungeon, conclusion, and it is an effective gameplay loop. The path is always clear, you've got options, the bosses are genuinely fucking fantastic most of the time, and the story leaves you hanging just enough that you're invested in seeing how things go. But there is one serious issue I had with how this whole thing works. It got really fucking tedious. I was enjoying myself. The game is good. I loved the art and music, and the actual combat itself is great. But 32 chapters, plus side quests, plus a bit more exploration here and there, plus party experimentation. For a few weeks, I was putting a few hours a day into this game, and after a while, I was really ready for it to be over. I'd put over 30 hours into the game, which is more than I do for most of the titles I cover on this channel, and I was only like halfway done with the story. And narratively, the game teases you by never giving you a real conclusion until the end of chapter 4. The mini-arc structure isn't really a proper arc, it's just an immediate conflict with an immediate resolution. It doesn't have the level of satisfaction that the close of an arc would have in a longer form story. And be clear, Octopath Traveler is a long game, but it is not long form. It's a collection of 8 short form stories that loosely connect to each other and are tied together in an epilogue. I kept feeling more and more tension and frustration with a game that I honestly feel overstayed its welcome, without getting the release of a satisfying conclusion until chapter 4, where all the releases happened all at once. But I powered through. After the first 20 hours or so, I wasn't hooked on it anymore, so I wasn't putting as much time in as I'd often do for other games I cover on this channel, but I was still making solid, consistent progress despite the tedium and despite my frustrations. I got to the end of each character's storyline and it felt pretty good. I felt like I was done and that I could finally set everything down and just chill, start work on the script, gather my thoughts about everything, and go at this with a cool head. But I wasn't done. I felt like I should be done, but I knew I wasn't. There was still the epilogue, complete with a super boss. Now, I won't spoil what happens or what the super boss is, at least not until much later in the video, but lore-wise, it's actually really important, really cool, and connects the 8 other stories in some really neat ways. Genuinely neat stuff in terms of story. But the way the game is structured, if you didn't already know about it and aren't a completionist, you might not realize that there even is an epilogue, because it really does feel like you're done once you complete the last chapter. And that's because once the main story is complete, there's a short series of side quests you have to do before the final area is unlocked. And this is also kind of neat because it ties into a few recurring characters you meet in side quests. Could have been executed better, but I like the idea. Now, I did know about this semi-hidden epilogue beforehand, so I kept going. I also knew that the super boss is the biggest combat challenge in the game, and it's not even close. So I had to prepare. I started out by closing out all the side quests I hadn't done naturally up to this point. Part of it was that the passive experience and JP I'd get would help boost my characters up a bit, and also allowed me to make sure everyone had their primary and secondary jobs fully upgraded. But additionally, many of the best weapons in the game are rewards for late game side quests, so I worked through them to be as prepared as possible for the super boss. I'd done a decent chunk of the side quests as I worked through the game, but I still had a bunch left unfinished by the time I was prepping for the epilogue. At that point, I was in full-on get this shit done mode, so I used walkthroughs. It still took me several days to get through. It definitely got tedious, but I forced myself through it. And then I had to grind a bit. Due to my own bad decisions, I underutilized Alfyn. See, for the super boss, you actually need to set up your 8 characters into 2 parties, meaning they all have to be up to scratch. So I grinded a bit. It was probably only an hour or two, but it was another thing tacked on. I was definitely getting a little frustrated, but the end was in sight. I was almost finished. And then came the final dungeon. What I was expecting was yet another standard JRPG dungeon, then a save point, then a boss. You know, like I'd seen literally dozens of times so far. But they changed things up a bit. It wasn't a standard JRPG dungeon at all. It was more of a bastardized hub world. No random encounters, but 8 interactable points. With each one, you'd actually fight a slightly remixed version of a previous boss. Not anything challenging, more of a way of showing how far you've come. After beating each boss, you get a book containing a bunch of neat lore. Only after beating all 8 of these bosses, which you can do in any order, does the room with the final boss unlock. In this room, you set up your 2 parties of 4 and engage in a brutally difficult set of fights against a super boss that is honestly phenomenal. Though you really are pushed to your limits, and it's not unlikely that you'll die. And when you die in Octopath Traveler, you get sent back to your most recent save, which can only be done at designated save points. While most dungeons will place a save point right next to the boss arena, the closest save point to the super boss is outside the dungeon, before the boss gauntlet, and you can't leave once you enter. Now look, I know I'm in the minority here, but I actually really like boss gauntlets in general. If they're designed to be challenging, it's a great test of all the skills you've learned in the game. If they're not, it's a great way to showcase how much you've improved at the game since you initially fought the boss. I loved it when Chrono Trigger did it. I love the gauntlets of strength in Sekiro. Boss gauntlets are fun for me. But I don't like having to go through an easy gauntlet every single time I want to attempt an extremely difficult final boss. Having to slog through 8 piss-easy boss fights for each attempt basically amounted to a 20-minute respawn timer, and I was fucking flabbergasted at this dogshit game design decision in an otherwise really competent game. And the final boss really is hard. I did multiple attempts and failed, even with strategy guides. I wanted to finish the game that day, but it was getting late and I had work the next day. The next day, I get home from work, unwind a bit, open up Steam, and I just couldn't force myself to boot up Octopath Traveler. I sat on the page and hovered over the play button, but I just didn't have it in me, even though I really wanted to get started on this video. The same thing happened the next day, and the next, and I realized something. I was completely and utterly burned out on this game, and the idea of playing it made me miserable, which is weird considering how I genuinely liked the game. So I realized I needed a break. I worked on some other projects, started my second channel, and produced 3 fully edited videos for it, and all in all spent over a month and a half away from Octopath Traveler. And even when the negative feelings left me, I still had no actual desire to play the game. I could definitely make myself play it again, but that's just it. I have to make myself play it, and thankfully I found a mod that lets you save after the gauntlet or I'd have lost my fucking mind. But that final fight, the super boss that should have been the epic showdown where everything comes to an end and closes out the game in a blaze of glory, was just a chore to me. Instead of each defeat lighting a fire under my ass like boss fights usually do, it was just annoying knowing I'd have to play this game more. Octopath Traveler is a fun game and is mechanically one of the best of the genre, at least from what I've played, but the tedium at the end combined with one of the worst design decisions I've ever seen in an otherwise good game sucked all the love I have for it out of me. This was the most severe case of gaming burnout that I've had in the past decade, and it's not even close. For all the great that this game has, it left a sour taste in my mouth. I can confidently say that I will never replay this game, even though I genuinely enjoyed most of my time with it. I just don't think I can bring myself to start it up again, and as soon as I'm done with this video, I'll be uninstalling it for good. I definitely got my money's worth, and I would honestly recommend it, but that'll always come with an asterisk. But before I leave you, I do want to quickly go over the story. It just wouldn't be an ads video without it. The story of Octopath Traveler isn't super complex or anything, and I won't be going as in-depth as I usually do, but I can't just leave it. So for starters, I do need to express how I really like how the developers broke the standard formula. JRPGs have a reputation for being formulaic and trope-heavy. I mean, how many times have you seen a group of friends go from a small town and humble beginnings, set off on an epic quest, save the world, and eventually kill God? That's the thing that usually happens. Octopath Traveler has a structure wherein each character has their own story that doesn't directly intersect with the others until the epilogue, and I think that's really neat. It's a really interesting idea to not have a single storyline. I just wish they committed to it. The annoying thing about Octopath Traveler is there's definitely some inconsistency in how the story is delivered. I briefly mentioned this earlier, but let's talk about how the story is actually presented with one key question. Do these 8 characters know each other? It's not actually clear, and in fact, the game itself doesn't seem to know. In some cases, the party will talk to each other, but in many of the chapters, the characters are put into situations where it would actually break the story if anyone else was there. The chapters seem to indicate that these are 8 solo adventures, while the overworld indicates that these are a group of companions who are helping each other out with their problems. I really wish the game would have just picked a direction. Either they're a group or they're not. And realistically, I think the idea of them being 8 people on a solo journey with the rest of the party being canonically not there and only serving a gameplay purpose would have been the way to go. Partly because that would better serve to break the mold of JRPG storytelling, and I always appreciate new takes on established genres. But also, it would have been harder from a development perspective to have them be a unit. I mean, since you can delay the acquisition of characters and do shit in any order, the dialogue of every chapter would need alternate bits of dialogue to account for who is and isn't there. But as is, the game kinda wants it both ways, and I feel like they just didn't have the balls to fully say, no, we're not doing the standard JRPG thing. This is the story of individuals, not groups. And the result is a weird limbo that honestly breaks immersion sometimes because of how inconsistently the story is presented. But what I do like is the lore and world building. Lore spoilers start here. Nothing about the main plot yet, but if you want to go in completely blind, this is the time to dip out. Octopath Traveler is set in a medieval-styled land of Astera, where magic exists and the dominant religion has a lot of social and political influence. The religious institution, the Order of the Sacred Flame, seems to draw inspiration from Christianity in its imagery and symbolism, though the mythology deviates pretty significantly. It's worth noting that the religious teachings of the Order are actually factually true. To make a long story short, the world was created by the mother goddess Ursa, who spawned out of the primordial chaos of nothingness that came before. In addition to creating everything, she also made the god Finis to keep her company. The two of them became parents to 13 deities, though Ursa would die while giving birth to the youngest, Galdera. The grief-stricken Finis then disappeared, never to be seen again. The remaining gods became the ruling pantheon, though Galdera eventually attempted to overthrow the rest to seize power for himself. He ultimately failed and was imprisoned in what's more or less a pocket dimension, sealed in via the Gate of Finis. He's still there, still trapped. He influences the world somewhat, spreading discord and malice. Obviously, he really wants to get the fuck out, but he's pretty much an afterthought at this point, and the remaining 12 continue to rule and guide humanity. Much of the world building of Octopath Traveler exists on the back of this religion. You get little bits and pieces of history, but not as much as you'd really expect. What you do get is a society that reflects the values of the Order and the gods they serve. Of course, each culture you come across is going to be different. The hunting village is going to be different than the mining town, which is going to be different from the trading hub, but they're all connected by the fact that the dominant religion is provably real. I do wish we got to learn a little more about the gods and their individual teachings though. Pretty much all the gods are essentially a name and not much else. I'd love to see each god have their own set of important values and teachings, and for the different locations to have a god they value a little more than the rest. You know, like how polytheistic religions have historically worked in the real world. Athens worshipping Athena, Sparta worshipping Ares, and so on. I just think that would have been a neat way to flesh out the world, and it honestly wouldn't have been too hard to implement. Just have an elder in each town give a little monologue about their patron deity and add in a few extra lore books. But while the world isn't super fleshed out narratively, it does an exceptional job of creating a world that you can be immersed in. And immersion is arguably the more important element when it comes to video games. So don't get me wrong, I think it could have been done better, but it definitely serves its purpose. Now I do want to go over each of the 8 stories that makes up this game. Since they have only 4 chapters and aren't super complex, I won't be picking them apart like I do in my other videos. But I will be giving a summary of each storyline and giving my overall thoughts on the character and their journey. I'm going to be giving a Cliff Notes version of their story, so details will be a bit sparse and I'm definitely not going to do everything justice. But this video is going to be long enough as is, and I just want to get this thing fucking released already. Please keep in mind that this means there will be spoilers, but only for the character I'm talking about at the time. Feel free to skip any you want to experience for yourself. This video's got chapters and timestamps in the description, and there will be a spoiler-free conclusion section at the end. Ophelia the Cleric is an exceptionally kind and selfless woman who is a devout servant of the Order and considers her purpose in life to be to help others. She was orphaned as a child in a war that was never explained to the player, but the Archbishop of the Church adopted her and raised her alongside his biological daughter Liana. Ophelia was sad and withdrawn, hiding away from the world, but Liana eventually got her to open up and become the kind and open person she is when we meet her. Her story begins as Liana is preparing to go on a sacred pilgrimage to bring the sacred flame to various other cathedrals throughout the land. Unfortunately, the Archbishop becomes seriously sick right before she's supposed to leave, so Ophelia volunteers to take her place so she can look after her father. Her travels take her throughout the continent, where she helps locals and eventually discovers a cult who are trying to sabotage the pilgrimage. Sadly, the Archbishop dies and Liana betrays Ophelia because the cult told her they could resurrect him. So Ophelia is captured, but Liana unlocks her cell before the cult plans on using her in a ritual that would free Galdera from his prison. Ophelia stops the ceremony, kills the cult leader, and the traumatized Liana shuts herself away until Ophelia eventually takes her to the same place they went as kids when she was sad and depressed, and convinces her to celebrate her father and honor his memory so that he can live on through them rather than being hung up on his death. Now, I like the ideas this story is going for, but I feel it went for too many of them in too short a time. Ophelia suffered from both imposter syndrome and an inferiority complex where she felt like less than Liana, even though the Archbishop considered her his daughter and Liana considered her her sister. But this kinda gets hand-waved away once the Archbishop dies, because then the story abruptly shifts to one where Liana is mad with grief and Ophelia embraces the Archbishop's teachings of celebrating life rather than mourning death. And then there was this neat bit of role reversal where Ophelia helps Liana come to terms with the death of her father just as she helped deal with the deaths of her parents. But I feel it lacked enough of a setup. The story itself was undoubtedly wholesome, but it had a tendency to introduce an internal conflict and then just solve it. I think they should have really just focused on one of the main themes, because 4 chapters isn't a whole lot of time for a full story, and I think they should have been a bit more minimalistic with the structure and themes. Also, the cult leader was a twist villain who was introduced as a merchant in chapter 1, and it didn't really hit for me. I think again it was a case of not enough time to do him justice. They really should have built him up as a recurring ally, only to then reveal the murder of the Archbishop and his involvement with the cult. So overall, Ophelia's story was kinda meh. Cyrus the Scholar is a professor and academic who values the pursuit and propagation of knowledge over pretty much everything else. I'm reasonably certain he's written to be high-functioning autistic. He's bad at reading people, obsesses over his interests, and occasionally commits social faux pas out of ignorance. Call it a hunch, but I tend to recognize my fellow autists, even the fictional ones. His story starts with him as the tutor of 2 girls, the princess and a young woman named Therese, the latter of whom clearly wants the D, though she's too shy to confess to him and he's too oblivious to notice. Out of jealousy, Therese spreads a rumor about him flirting with the princess, which gets out of hand and causes a big scandal. He ends up deciding on a leave of absence to let things cool off while he can go on a search for a lost historical book that had disappeared from the library over a decade ago. In his search for the book, he uncovers information about a ritual involving blood crystals created from human sacrifices. Eventually, he finds that the headmaster of his school, who notably believes that knowledge should be hoarded for power, has been studying the crystals to do evil shit. He ambushes Cyrus, though in the ensuing battle, Cyrus wins out. But it was actually his assistant Lucia pulling the strings the whole time. She was manipulating the headmaster. Eventually, they fight, he wins, and he discovers the warning of a mysterious destructive force that he vows to study for the benefit of humanity. So this story is definitely a bit more focused than Ophelia's. There's a consistent theme throughout, that being Cyrus's belief that knowledge should be shared for the benefit of all, compared to the headmaster and Lucia who believe it should be hoarded for personal gain at the expense of others. The thematic ideas do get a bit lost when it comes to the evil rituals and demonic powers and shit, but there was at least one consistent message throughout the story. I think the story is carried by Cyrus himself. His characters written have such a genuine passion for the pursuit of knowledge that it's hard to not get excited for him. And his highly academic way of speaking combined with his autistic lack of social awareness has plenty of sections where he acts as a soft comic relief character. He's just fun. His story is middling as a whole, but it kept me invested and I liked Cyrus himself, so decent enough. Tressa the Merchant is a bouncy, excitable, and ambitious young woman. She's the youngest of the main cast at 18 and wants nothing more than to become a great merchant, dealing in special treasures and traveling the world. Despite her somewhat naive optimism towards the world, she has a gift for haggling and can almost immediately tell what an item is special in some way. Her story is pretty straightforward. With the help of a former pirate captain turned merchant, she combats a local band of pirates who've been terrorizing hometown. The merchant captain lets her take one item from his ship as thanks, and she picks an old journal, reading about its author's travels around the world, inspiring her to go on her own journey to become the greatest merchant dealing in the best wares. In her travels, she meets another talented merchant, Ali, and the two become friendly rivals. She also overthrows a powerful individual who'd used monopolistic tactics to profit off the local gold mines at the expense of those who worked there. She also gets into a competition with Ali to see who can find and sell the greatest treasure at the annual Merchant's Fair. She finds a rare gemstone, learns more about the pirate turned merchant, and meets a frail girl who dreams of travel, though is not physically capable of it. Well, as it turns out, her father hosts the main event of the Merchant's Fair, which is a competition to see who can offer the greatest treasure where the reward is essentially a shitload of money. The purpose is so he can make his daughter happy, to find something that can fill the void in her heart. Tressa offers the notebook, which she had been adding to, and wins, though it did at one point get stolen, so she had to go through JRPG shenanigans to retrieve it. When all is said and done, she feels like she accomplished what she set out to do and returns home to her family. So I'd say Tressa's story does a better job than the last two at reinforcing its core ideas, where the big theme is a contrast between monetary value and intangible or sentimental value. This is also reinforced with a contrast in merchant tactics. Tressa and Ali believe in providing value to their buyers and making sure the exchange is mutually beneficial, while the various antagonists view commerce solely as a means of enriching themselves. It's pretty well done overall, though I will say that it does suffer from the same problem of too much story and not enough time, that a lot of the other stories have. And Tressa herself is a really fun character too. Personally, I like the character trope of the excited, optimistic idealist who's annoying but in an endearing way. And I have to say, I think her English voice actress, Frida Wolf, did a fucking stellar job. Octopath Traveler has great voice acting in general, but this was definitely the standout performance for me. So overall, Tressa's story was pretty fun. Olberic the Warrior is arguably the backbone of the group, speaking only as necessary but possessing an unyielding dedication to his own moral code. He was once a knight for the kingdom of Hornburg, renowned for his skill in combat, though that all ended when his friend Erhardt betrayed them and committed regicide, bringing down the entire kingdom. He abandoned his past life and took up a quiet existence as the combat instructor for a small town. His story begins with him fighting off a group of bandits who had been harassing the town, the leader of which was able to loosely point him in the direction of Erhardt. So he decides to go find him. After some trials and tribulations, he learns that Erhardt's motivation was that his hometown was completely razed in the course of some war and pretty much everyone was killed. From that day on, he hated the king and plotted to eventually kill him. And when Olberic tracks him down, he finds that he'd become a local legend, protecting the town from hostile lizardmen and overall being a genuinely positive influence for the area and its people. After a confrontation, he learned that Erhardt had been manipulated by the leader of a mercenary unit named Werner, who stoked his hatred and got him into a position where he could actually kill the king. Werner had since taken over a town and ruled it in an almost comically dictatorial manner. Olberic manages to overcome Werner, who self-unalives. Olberic returns home feeling like he's redeemed his past failure and vowing to fight to protect those weaker than him. I don't have all that much to say about this story, either positive or negative. Olberic isn't a bad character by any stretch, but he is kinda bland, and his story is very straightforward with a simple plot, simple theme, and pretty standard conclusion. I really feel bad about not being able to elaborate much more than that, but Olberic's story is about as mid as it gets. Primrose the Dancer is a focused, calculating woman fueled by a cold rage and desire for revenge. I like her. She was the daughter of a prominent nobleman, though as a child she watched him get murdered by 3 men who each had a crow tattoo. She fled and dedicated herself to tracking down these 3 men. Eventually, she takes up a position as a dancer underneath the sleazy asshole. Her story begins when she finally finds one of these 3 men. This guy runs a brothel, and she manages to get a map to the place, though her boss, who's involved in all this, kills one of her friends and coworkers before she fights and kills him. She tracks down and kills 2 of the men and reunites with some old allies to her household and a childhood friend of hers. However, this childhood friend turns out to be the final man she was looking for. He turns on her, but she eventually tracks him down and kills him. At the end of it all, she has fulfilled her purpose, but still feels the emptiness of grief as vengeance did not truly make her happy. This is an interesting case because the story itself is nothing special. We've all seen revenge stories with a bittersweet ending before. It's really nothing new. But I do think that Primrose is probably the best character of the main cast and is certainly the most complex. Everyone else is more or less one note with a simple defined personality and a clear moral code that they follow. But not Primrose. She hides her grief in isolation behind a mask of confidence, and her quest for vengeance is all-consuming. Ever since her father died, she became a loner, relying on nobody but herself, and who can blame her? When she made a friend, their boss killed her. And hell, her childhood friend, one of the people she cared most about, was the person who ruined her life. But she wasn't alone. Not truly. She still had friends. People who remembered her and respected her father and helped her in her time of need. And at the end of everything, she was still lost, but she finally found it in herself to face her father's grave. She didn't know what was in store for her, but she was at least in a position where she can start to heal. This is all genuinely solid character work. It's actually kind of impressive that they managed to do so well with her in the limited time they had to work with. Her story may not have been the most interesting, but she's a great character and I enjoyed her story. Alfyn the Apothecary is friendly, outgoing, and altruistic person. As a child, he was poor and fell sick with a disease known in-game only as the Great Pestilence. His life was saved by a traveling apothecary who wouldn't even accept payment for his services. This inspired both him and his childhood friend Zeph to study medicine, and they would grow up to be valued members of their local community. Alfyn's story begins when he saves Zeph's little sister from a snake bite, finding the snake in question and developing an antidote to its venom. This pushes him to fulfill what he believes is his true purpose in life: to travel the world healing the sick and injured who are in need, taking payments from those who can afford it, and freely offering aid to those who can't. In his travels, he thwarts another apothecary who had secretly poisoned a town and sold the cure at a massive markup. Later, he meets yet another apothecary, one of the most skilled out there, who preaches a philosophy of only healing those who deserve it. Of course, Alfyn then saves the life of a criminal who ends up kidnapping a child. In order to save the youngster, he is forced to kill the man he had so recently saved. It's later revealed that this morally gray apothecary had previously saved the life of a man who would soon after kill his wife. From then on, he wandered, healing those he viewed as good, but ultimately just plodding along until he could one day join his wife in death, which is why he opted not to treat the sickness that had taken hold of him. Alfyn eventually has his own inner revelations and basically cures the apothecary against his will and more or less forces him to begin the emotional healing process. He encourages him to live on, doing good in his wife's memory. And with that, Alfyn vows to continue traveling and continue healing. So if you've ever seen any kind of medical drama in your life, you've probably seen some variation of this central conflict. It's basically cliche, and every hospital show has to have a moment where one of the doctors grapples with the morality of treating an evil patient. And Alfyn's story is pretty much the most storybook way you could handle the story, with him basically taking the position of the Hippocratic Oath and deciding that it's not his place to decide who lives and who dies. Instead, he helps all he can, even if his patients may eventually live on to do bad things. Fundamentally, this story is solid because the core theme is one that's inherently intriguing enough that many different IPs have opted to utilize it. But it doesn't do anything special, and Alfyn himself is kind of a bland character. His one personality trait is that he's really friendly and generous. Nothing about him really compelled me. His story isn't bad by any means, it's just kinda there. Therion the Thief is the stereotypical charming rogue of the party. He's all sarcasm, confidence, and dry wit. You know, the charming rogue trope. His story begins when he hears of a valuable treasure being held under heavy guard in the local noble manor. Therion, of course, sets out to steal it, expertly sneaking past the guards and traps, though right as he's about to escape with the treasure, the butler manages to attach a fool's bangle to his wrist. A bracelet with a lock that denotes a thief who has been thoroughly bested. Basically, the greatest humiliation a proud thief like Therion could be forced to bear. The lady and head of the household reveals that she's spread the rumors specifically to attract talented thieves, and that if Therion works for her and steals back 4 dragonstones which had been stolen from her, she'll have the fool's bangle removed from his wrist. In his travels, he methodically recovers the dragonstones one by one and eventually runs into his old partner in crime, a man named Darius. It's revealed that the two were quite successful working together until Darius betrayed Therion, pushing him off a cliff in exchange for membership in a renowned band of thieves who he would eventually lead. Darius proceeds to obtain the 2 final dragonstones for himself, though Therion eventually confronts him with the help of the butler, a former master thief himself, and Darius is later betrayed by his own unit once it became convenient to get rid of him. He then returns the dragonstones, loses the bangle, and all is well. So Therion's story deals with themes of betrayal and redemption. The actual plot of the Dragonstones and all that don't really matter as much as the revelations of Therion's past and the internal struggles he goes through. He was betrayed by someone he thought of as a brother and essentially became a recluse, hiding himself behind his mask of confidence and his skills as a thief, not entirely unlike Primrose. And he struggles with the reality that there are 2 paths ahead of him, one where he becomes like Darius and manipulates others for his own benefit, and one where he becomes like the butler and opens his heart to others and lives a more noble life. Honestly, I feel like this story mainly suffers from a lack of runtime. There's just not enough story time to properly explore these ideas beyond a surface level. You'll notice that I've been saying that a lot, but that really is one of the game's biggest weaknesses when it comes to writing. Yes, this is a fucking long game, but when you split that time between 8 different characters and also realize that the majority of their chapters are actually just pure gameplay, that doesn't leave a whole lot of time for fleshed out narratives. So what can I really say about Therion's story? He's kind of a neat character, mainly because I do actually like the charming rogue trope, and his story explores some pretty basic themes. Interesting enough, and I was definitely curious about the outcome of the Therion-Darius confrontation, but it's nothing special. Honnet the Hunter, in addition to having the most annoying name to spell, is the group's official girl boss. She, as her title implies, makes her living as a hunter for her clan in the village of Swarky. One thing to note is that Honnet and all her clan members speak in a dialect that seems to be a mix of Middle English and Modern English, essentially taking the way we speak today and giving some of the grammar and word choice a bit of Shakespearean flair. The best way I can explain it is by simply quoting Honnet. "Linda judgeth thee worthy. It is not often she warmeth to strangers. I shall accept in thine offer. Lend in me thy strength in battle." And count yourselves lucky, because I was very tempted to do this entire section in the Swarky dialect, but ultimately decided not to. A year before the start of Octopath Traveler, Honnet's mentor and father figure Zanta left the village to pursue a creature known only as Red Eye who'd been terrorizing people. Honnet's story begins when she receives a contract to kill a displaced predator. An animal, not a Minecraft YouTuber. After killing the beast, she is found by Zanta's wolf companion, who she then follows as she correctly assumes that he's in danger. She eventually comes into contact with several of Zanta's allies and finds out that Red Eye had turned into stone. After visiting another friend of Zanta's, she learns that to cure him, she has to take down Red Eye herself, though after killing a dragon, as you do, the seer creates a potion that'll allow her to resist Red Eye's petrification. Eventually, and with the help of 2 governments, she confronts and kills Red Eye, saving Zanta alongside all of Red Eye's other victims. So here's the thing about Honnet's story. In terms of introducing and reinforcing some sort of theme, it's easily the weakest story of the 8. But it's also probably the most engaging and exciting, at least for me. And at the end of the day, even though the other stories tried to do things with their core themes, they never really managed to execute it well. Meanwhile, Honnet's story is really just about a badass woman going out to save her mentor. There is a little bit of writing that demonstrates how Honnet has trouble opening up to people and expressing her emotions, but that really feels more like general character work than any kind of persistent theme. So while I would normally criticize it for its lack of an actual point, I actually found myself enjoying the story much more than the others, and I like the pure fun factor of it all. Plus, she had these moments where her social awkwardness and fish out of water mentality put her as a bit of a soft comic relief, which I appreciate. And also, Red Eye is the coolest fucking boss in the game. He looks like some sort of glowing Lovecraftian abomination. Fucking love it. So like the other stories, it's not particularly strong, but definitely fun. And let's quickly talk about the epilogue. It's not structured like the rest of the chapters. Instead, there's a relatively short line of side quests featuring a recurring character you've seen periodically ever since the very beginning of the game. Well, long story short, this guy's been looking for his father, and this mysterious woman eventually tricks him into coming with her. She turns out to actually be Galdera's daughter, who plans on using the dude to free him. The party finds out about this, and I will give the story credit for cleverly taking bits and pieces from each of the 8 stories and referencing them in the epilogue. But they go to the gates of Finis where Galdera is imprisoned, but arrive just barely too late to stop everything. But since this is a JRPG, the party bands together and successfully kills God. And then there's a really anticlimactic ending that's more or less just amounts to, you beat the game, good job. Yeah, I wish I could say more positive things about it too. When it comes to the writing of Octopath Traveler, I can't really say it's bad, but it's not all that good. Which is kind of surprising because while I knew very little about the game going in, I had few people tell me that the story was good. I definitely appreciate how they went outside the box and told separate stories rather than just going by the JRPG formula, but I really don't feel that they did the idea justice. Each story felt incredibly surface level, and even the ones that were fun certainly weren't very memorable. And then it felt like the game couldn't even decide if the stories were solo adventures or not. This was something that could have been really good. The characters themselves are solid, the little bits of dialogue we get from them are very charming, but the story ultimately relegates itself to just being a companion piece for the gameplay. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it definitely feels like wasted potential. If you're going to try this game out, do it for the gameplay, not the story. So that was Octopath Traveler. I love and hate this game. There is so much good about this game, but for all the deserved praise it gets, for me there will always be a but at the end of it. The combat system is great, but the late game pacing gave me severe burnout. The bosses, and especially the final boss, are incredible, but the gauntlet at the end makes it a genuinely miserable experience if you aren't modding the game. The story is really inventive and breaks the mold, but they fail to commit to it or actually utilize the unique structure in any way that matters. Octopath Traveler is a good game, maybe even a great game, but it's not a masterpiece. And what really hurts is that it could have been. That being said, I do still recommend this game for a casual playthrough. Maybe just don't push yourself to play it as much as I did. Let's be real here, for like $15 or $20 on sale, I don't really remember, I got 80 hours of entertainment out of it. Even though I'll probably never play this game again, I got my money's worth. The game has its faults, but I don't regret playing it. This game will always be bittersweet to me, but it's worth checking out. Thanks for watching. Big thank you to my patrons, especially my God tier supporters, Bulk Squat Thrust, Drago, and Michael Rotolo. If you'd like to join them and get early access to things on both my channels, consider joining Patreon down below. And if you want to leave a highlighted comment that I will read out in a future video, consider using the super thanks option below this video. Follow me on Twitter at AdsTweets, join the Discord server, and don't forget to subscribe to the second channel if you like Dark Souls and anything else that pops into my head. I know this video took way too long to come out. The burnout I mentioned really messed with me, but I'm happy to have this video out for you all. This has been looming over my head for so long, and with this out of the way, I can finally get back to some of the big projects I promised you guys. More Alisoft games, more visual novels. Big things are coming. Once again, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Play the Electro Swing.
Hit the road, Jack, and don't you come back no more, no more, no more, no more.